just joined, thank you for being with us today. We're going to kick off in just another couple of seconds. We have a poll that we'd love for you to participate in, just to give us a sense of who's with us today. So take a few seconds to do that as we get folks convened here. And just a little heads up, we really like, as we get farther into our programs, to ask folks to actually be seen on camera. So if you want to be thinking towards that, that would be great. You don't have to do it right now, but as we get farther in, you'll hear us sort of encourage that. It's obviously your choice still. All right, I'm going to go ahead and wrap up the poll, and we'll see where we landed there. All right, we have 80% of those who are here today are farmers. 20% are farm service providers. A couple of you are others. And produce and specialty crops is the chief product, 60%, with 20% livestock and 20% grain for animal consumption. And then we're split between folks who have 0 to 9 acres and 50 to 99 acres, 40% each. And then there's a small percentage of folks with 500 acres or more. So welcome. That's a great variety of people represented. We can hop to the next slide real quick. Obviously, we're all in this room together for Soil Health to Go. It'll be a quick, hopefully informative opportunity to learn about how one farmer in our region is handling her soil health management. Really appreciate you all being here. I'm Elizabeth Beggins. I am the Maryland Agriculture Outreach Specialist for the Million Acre Challenge. I live in Talbot County. I've been here for about 7 years, and 13 years of that I was a market farmer, and then I sort of shifted over to more farm service work. I, along with Amanda Cather, who's our project director, and Lisa Garfield, who is Million Acre Challenge coordinator for Future Harvest, are all full-time paid staff for the Million Acre Challenge. But the project itself is supported by 6 partner collaborative organizations. And so that is the reason why we all have different email addresses, in case that's a source of curiosity. The Million Acre Challenge is intended to build soil health programming and access to soil health networking across the state. And I'm going to tell you just a tiny bit more about us before we move on to hear from Kathleen. Next slide. So our mission and vision, I don't want to read those out, you can all read, but you will notice, I hope, that we are a farmer-focused initiative. We want to continue to reiterate that farmers are part of the solution as far as we're concerned. And our goal is to help those of you who are farming become even more profitable, doing what you already want to do, which is to build your soil and your ecosystem health on the farm and off. Next slide. Couple of highlights. We are offering regular Soil Health Hub meetings. This is a way for folks to network and come together, unfortunately right now remotely, but eventually hopefully in person. All across the state, we are dividing the hubs up regionally, but for now we're also offering statewide meetings remotely, and keep your ears open for more on that later in today's program. Our soil health benchmark study is headed up by Lisa Garfield. It's offered through PASA, and we're so glad to have a really robust 2021 cohort. I've said this before, our website is still coming soon. We're all holding our breath, waiting for that to be able to go forward. So stay tuned. Next slide. Okay, so the heart of the matter for today is Kathleen Moss. Kathleen and her family grow on leased land in, let's see, I have here, Kathleen, actually Talbot County, but that's not right.
Right, yeah, it's Dorchester. Yeah, but I live in Talbot and then commute out to the farm. Yeah.
No, I remembered that you lived in Talbot County and I had wanted to correct that. So Dorchester County, they are bringing new life to an existing farm. Soil health is at the heart of their practices on their no-till, no tractor, no synthetic chemicals farm. They achieve high productivity using intensive growing practices, specialized equipment, and regenerative soil science. Working thoughtfully and lovingly with the land is the heart of their daily practice. Kathleen has worked in small-scale agriculture for more than a decade. Okay, next slide. So this is Kathleen's wonderful video. I just want to put a little pin in the fact that we are going to be collecting videos from folks who want to submit something similar to this anytime between now and June to talk about what you're doing on your farm for soil health management. And if you do that, you're going to be entered into a contest to win $50. So we'll be looking for those from you now or anytime between now and June. Kathleen in this video is going to mention, just sort of tune your ears to the things that she suggests they are doing on their farm that are helping them regenerate soil. You're going to hear things again like no-till, no synthetic pesticides, etc. So we can roll that video now.
I'm Kathleen Moss of Briar Farm. I grow about a ½ acre of mixed vegetables using no-till growing practices. It is January right now, so a big focus is on rest and replenishment for the soil. We've got about half the farm under large silage tarps right now to start prepping the ground for production this March. One of these blocks I'm going to seed, I think in Dutch white clover to be a perennial cover crop. And we'll just plant into that for the season, give that a try. And then today too, I'm gonna be digging up some soil samples to send off to Logan Labs to get a little snapshot on how our soils are doing at Fairmont. And then we'll be developing a soil amendment plan with Seven Springs Farm in Virginia to help you know, amend and improve the soil as much as we can over the course of the season.
Bravo, you're a star. All right, next slide. All right, so you heard mention of some of the things that Kathleen is doing at Briar Farm. She and I talked earlier in the month, and the 4 bullet points that you see here are some of the things that we're going to be highlighting in the questions that we're going to be asking her. We may not get to everything, and we may not get to be too in depth on any one thing because this is a short show, but please do pop your questions into the chat box and we'll have some open time in just a couple of minutes to take those questions. Next slide. So Kathleen and I have already had some conversation around all of the 6 things that you see here. So at a certain point, I'm going to take this particular slide away, and this is the moment where I suggest that if we can, we allow ourselves to be seen, because it's really nice in this virtual world that we're all navigating to make eye contact to the extent possible. So we're going to be talking about her no-till, no tractor, no synthetics approach and how those support her soil health goals. We'll touch on her cover crop program, the benefits she's finding of using compost, how she is using soil testing to gain knowledge about her soil, and then challenges that continue and successes. So, all right, let's drop that slide off and we'll go back to seeing each other in person for a little while. I see about half the face is lit and half the face is not lit. Are you guys comfortable with letting yourselves be seen? We don't really care what you look like today, if it's a bad day or not. All right, we'll move on. Okay, so Kathleen, farmer du jour, talk a little bit about your approach to no-till, no tractor, no synthetics, and how you feel those are supporting your soil health on your farm.
Yeah, no. So as much as I really wish that I had more of kind of like a scientific or book learning sort of background to soil health. I think a lot of it just comes from experience and sort of a willingness to observe and see what's working and what's not working. And if something's not working, then being willing to go with that. I had worked on small scale vegetable farms for a long time, most of which, you know, sort of used tillage in a pretty traditional way. And after I had started my own little operation, which was just like a quarter of an acre, maybe, like in my backyard, you know, and I was using a rototiller, and it broke, and I didn't have the money to fix it or get a new one, and so I had to start thinking a little bit more creatively. But fortunately, by that point, there were kind of some other people around, some books, you know, kind of like dealing with ways to reduce tillage in vegetable operations. So we started covering plots with the black silage tarps, and just really noticed like just a visible improvement in kind of biological activity. And it also made, for me, it kind of streamlined my production practices, and it just made the bed process a little bit easier and kind of make more sense for me.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I love that you that it was out of necessity that you sort of into this. I think that's true for a lot of us with a lot of situations, but especially farming. Like, oh, look at that giant leap I just took because I was forced into a corner. How do you think that the those management practices have you seen obvious evidence of soil health improvement?
Yes, definitely. You know, even just you can see like a different sort of earthworm activity, and on the place that we're at now. So this is the start of my third season on this property in Hurlock, and it was just in conventional corn and soy, very sandy, like very dead soil. And you know, you can see a difference between where I'm at and then the area around it, just in terms of what's going on. You know, bioactivity, tilth, water retention, all that sort of thing. And another thing that it really makes a big difference with is weed management. And that's a function, I think, first of all, of the fact that you're not turning over weed seeds, but I think also like over time, as just like the soil life becomes more balanced, I think your weed problems are going to diminish. So that's another huge advantage. It's not something that you see in the first few years, but like after, you know, I think this year we're really going to start seeing it, and in following years.
I just want to pick up on something that we may have breezed over too rapidly earlier, but you did mention the fact that you're on leased ground. So maybe reflect a little bit on your willingness to invest what you're investing right now in terms of labor and soil building on ground that's not your own.
Yeah, no, and this is kind of like a huge, it's almost like a spiritual consideration or something too, and not just like a financial one. I'm very lucky to be in a very good relationship with the people that I'm leasing with, and you know, I do see this as, you know, you know, into this like a decade long sort of project. So it does make it easier for me to invest resources and time and energy into building soil health. And the thing that I find is like I have more hesitancy to put money into infrastructure, but as far as the soil is concerned, I just see that as such a foundation of everything else that I'm doing that I try not to let that hold me back. And as well, I think that even if I'm not going to be there forever, I'm consoled by the thought of leaving a footprint of improvement regardless.
Thank you. That's I can't help but agree. Okay, so let's move on a little bit to cover crops. I think, Amanda, if you'll pop up, please, the slide that just shows some of the bounty, slide number 10, that's coming out of Foxbriar Farm. I think folks need to see the results of what Kathleen is achieving on this little piece of property. I mean, that's just an amazing array of beautiful produce right there. So cover crops, what have you tried? What's on your agenda to try in the near future?
Yeah, so in the past, usually what I have done is, and this almost feels a little bit like cheating, but I just get, there's like, Johnny's has a fall cover crop mix. So it's got, there's clover and vetch and rye and some winter peas, just kind of like a nice array. There's really, you know, the soils were quite poor going into it. So I figured a little bit of everything's not going to hurt. And so that will get sown in the fall. And then in like right around this time of year, it'll get mowed or covered or both. So I would like mow it just with like a lawnmower. Actually, we just use like my my like riding lawnmower, and it just fits right over top of the beds, and kind of mow it down and then cover the whole field with a silage tarp. So I'm hoping this year to experiment with one. I have it's broken down into 6 plots. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to put one of the plots into Dutch white clover to be a perennial cover crop. And then I'm going to try to just plant like nightshades into that bed. So we'll see. It's like going to be an experiment, but you know, and I'm hoping that will help help the soil. And also, you know, it's going to reduce weeds. I had been thinking about covering it, about integrating more like plastic weed barrier, but then I was like, I would rather not. So is there maybe another way to do this for those like above ground crops? So yeah, well, like I said, we'll see. It's definitely an experiment, but
we'll have to bring you back in a year to see how that played out. Okay. And when we talked, you talked a bit about your use of compost and how that is going for you and has evolved over your time on this piece of land.
Yeah, so we, you know, there's really, going into this, there was hardly any organic matter. So I do use quite a bit of compost. And the other advantage of kind of like layering compost every time I flip over a bed is that oftentimes, like if you are doing no tillage, you end up with essentially like some plant debris. So for example, like after like a winter of cover crop and then the silage tarp, if you pull back the tarp and everything's killed back, but there's still kind of some like rough debris on the top of the beds. And so rather than like cleaning that out, I just layer compost over the top. and that creates like a good tilth for direct seeding, which I do a lot of, like, you know, like closely seeded fine seeds in bed. So I do need to still have like a nice just like medium to be planting in. So using compost has really helped to do that, while also mitigating some of the quirks of not using any tillage.
And where are you getting your compost?
So this past season, I got it from Full Circle Mushroom Compost. And then, so the season before, I had ended up using Purdue's compost, but I wanted to try to just use something that was not chicken manure based, to add a little bit of diversity to just the amendments.
Okay. All righty. I was just about to type into chat, but I'll just say it out loud. Those of you who are generating questions in your head, please feel free to go ahead and put those in the chat box. We're going to have some open space here in just a minute to get to those questions. We've got 3 more questions and not as much time as I wish. So let's just real briefly talk about soil testing. What's your program there?
Yeah, so I do soil test every winter, and have been mostly focused on getting like NPK numbers balanced and organic matter. And then going into the future, I'm going to be kind of more focused on the micronutrient sort of side of things, which that's where having somebody who can give you advice is very important, because I think that's something that's very easy to mess up. But I've had really good experience with Seven Springs Farm. They have everything that you could ever want. And they're also very ready to help with any questions. You know, you can kind of just give them you can just give them like a snapshot of what your soil sample says, and they can kind of give you some guidance from there.
Nice. And that's Seven Springs Farm. We'll try to pop that link into the chat box. All right. Hopefully you're going to get into some of this as people ask questions, but we're wrapping up your question answer part, your direct question answer part, with what would you say are your greatest remaining challenges, followed by successes, and how you know things are working?
Yeah, so I think as far as challenges, you know, something that we can kind of easily get caught up in the sort of input paradigm and kind of leave it at that. And that is so important. But I need to learn more about the balance between bacterial and fungal life in the soil, and how to encourage that, and how to really kind of get that right for what I'm growing. And it's something that I don't have a very good knowledge base. I don't even know that there's a ton of great information out there for farmers yet at this point, to really be able to put into practice. But that's kind of like the next frontier, I think, for me. And in terms of, you know, I just really have seen, first of all, you know, we've had very successful yields from this on about 22,000 square feet. I did a 35-person CSA and a very busy farmers market last year, with basically no problem supplying that. You know, but 2, I just have seen, you know, from one year to the next, how the ecosystem just even surrounding the farm is really coming back to life. And it's something that's actually very inspiring to me when I'm out there working, that, you know, this is worth it. Just seeing, you know, the birds and the wildlife and the grasses and, yeah, that sort of thing.
Awesome. Okay, we do have some questions in the chat box, and some of them hit on things that I haven't had time to ask you myself. So somebody's reading my mind. That's awesome. I also want to just mention that before we started, Kathleen did suggest that she could hang around for an extra few minutes if we are running long. So we may tack an extra little 15 minutes on here for those of you who are able and interested in sticking around. So let's see here. Carrie Vaughn has asked, you mow and tarp the fall cover crop now. How big is your cover crop at this stage? Most of our rye and vetch is still pretty small this time of year.
Yeah, so timing is like super important. And if I can't get it in, if I can't get that cover crop in before maybe like early October, it probably is not going to get big enough to where it's going to be super useful to me at this point. So there's, and in a block, like I'm not even necessarily going to be cover cropping each block. Like it depends on what beds are open. And then other beds I'll just kind of leave in old crop residue as a cover. So I'd say, you know, 8 to 12 inches at least, and then sometimes more if it's later on in the spring that we end up covering. So like I'll cover some blocks now, and then in like March, some other beds will be covered too, if that makes sense. And I've also found, so in the past, I always mowed the beds beforehand, but I have found that so long as they're under cover long enough, you really don't even have to mow. It's just a matter of like, are you in a rush to get those beds in production? And if you are, then mow them. But if not, then don't bother.
And Lisa Garfield said, what are your favorite tools? And I know one of the things you said to me is don't be afraid to invest in good tools. Yeah, definitely. So one thing I really love, there's in the picture here, I'm using the tilther from Johnny's. So that it's a drill powered, it's got little tines on it, and you're just kind of smoothing the very top surface of the soil, which helps to kind of break down the chunks of compost and, you know, put some of that soil amendment just into the very surface of the soil. So it's not just all blowing away. It makes a really perfect seed bed, and I just direct seed right after tilthing. But my favorite tool is definitely my broad fork. I have a couple of different ones, you know, so I'm able to go in with that and just kind of, you don't even have to use it that aggressively. Like I have learned over time. I think when I first started using it, I was like still kind of in like this tillage mindset of you really have to move the soil. But now, you know, you can just kind of like gently rock it back and just get a little bit of air in there, and it makes a huge difference in beds and reducing compaction. And it's also, I think it's a lot of fun to use too. Yeah, and one of the things that Kathleen said to me was, you know, don't skimp on tools. If you can invest some funds in good tools, go ahead and do that, because it'll make your life a little easier. We are at 12:30 for those that need to hop off, and maybe Amanda, you can hop to that last slide, just a quick worth knowing slide for folks who need to leave. We do have another statewide soil health hub meeting planned for Tuesday, February 23rd, tentatively. We're still making sure this is a suitable date for the folks on our project. But you might want to go ahead and hold the date on your calendar. We typically are meeting early in the morning, again via Zoom, 7:30 to 9:30. And this gives you access to folks from all over the state, from all production systems. We're encouraging you to follow us on social media. As I said, our website is coming, but in the meantime, we've got 4 opportunities for you to connect with us. in the social realm. And then our next soil health to go is the second Wednesday of February. And we are going to follow that pattern through June, and that sign up URL stays the same. So I hope you won't miss any of them. Okay, for those who want to stick with us, we'll carry on. We do have another question. And for those who have to leave, thank you so much for being here and for your time and attention and your soil health work. We really appreciate it. Kathleen, the next question is, does all of the compost that you add give you too much phosphorus? Do you run into nutrient management restrictions?
So I have not yet had an issue with that. And actually, but the phosphorus levels on the field that I was at were a little high, but it was not terrible for whatever reason. I think maybe because it's so sandy or something, it maybe just was not holding on to a ton of it. I think yeah, it has not been an issue for me so far. Yeah.
And Carrie, if you're still here, have you run into that at Claggett?
Yeah, well, this is a perennial problem of ours, that our soils are just very high in phosphorus. So when we have tried to do these permanent beds where one of the ways that you avoid tillage is to layer on a bunch of compost and build up the soil with the compost. We're actually not permitted in the state of Maryland to add phosphorus to fields that are already very high in phosphorus. So compost by nature has phosphorus in it, and there's just not an easy way around that problem for us. So I just wasn't sure. It sounds like that, if your soil is really sandy and it's not already high in phosphorus, then that, at least for now, is not a big problem.
And I would not have known, because like I've said, you guys are the experts. I would not have known that phosphorus is inherent to compost. I would have thought it was more related to the type of compost and the feedstocks that went into it, but maybe both are true.
Well, most naturally derived products have nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium in them. And it's not that compost has especially high phosphorus, but it does have some small percentage of it. Any compost does. So there are very few naturally derived products that don't have some amount of phosphorus in them, because every part of a living body will have all three of those things.
I have a quick question, or more a request to share. Were there any unintended or unexpected challenges or consequences of using no-till? And I'm asking this just because in my own experience, I ended up with a lot of grasshoppers and voles because I wasn't disturbing their habitat at all by tilling. And so I'm just wondering if you've encountered other things like that you can just help people be aware of and look out for if they transition to no-till.
So, I also have a lot of grasshoppers, but I think that might just be that there are so many of them around. That's a good question. I mean, I think it is like fundamentally just like a mental shift, and like your time scales, you kind of have to like plan in a really different sort of way. And, sometimes it's just a challenge to, to invest the time ahead of time to get yourself straight for the season. It always feels like really crammed come like February and March. Like, am I gonna be able to like have the beds ready to get what I need to get done in time? So yeah, I think for me, just sort of like reshaping how I think about time management has been a really big shift. And it's still something that is being refined. For sure. Yeah. And and the other thing is you really have to be on top of your weed management, especially in the first few years. And, because you're not going to be able to just till those problems away. Like you have to get it immediately and not let weeds take hold and keep reseeding for this to all kind of work, I think. So you have to be committed to that and like have the right tools to be able to deal with weed management.
So we do have another potential question that came through to me, assuming, Arjun, do you want to put that out into the into the ether? Are you still here?
I just did. Can one make it?
Yeah. I'm not going to say it's impossible, but we do not. Like, this is not our sole source of income. My husband also has a job. He's a teacher. So
let me just interrupt real quick. The question is, can one make a living on half an acre, or or is an off-farm job needed as well? So
yeah. This is not our sole source of income. However, there are plenty of people out there in the internet world who seem to be able to do it. I think a lot of it depends. It's not just on like, I think it's possible to produce enough. I think the problem becomes in marketing it effectively to really maximize the amount of money that you're making off of that space, which kind of requires a lot of things to be in alignment. So you have to have like affordable land also in a place where like people are willing to spend a lot of money on what you're growing. In my experience, those two things often are kind of at odds with each other. So there is that. And I also think, what I try to tell myself is that there are very few households that are single income, like in regardless of what the job is, in most households with families, two people are working, and that's our situation, and that's okay.
Yeah, thank you so much. I really appreciate the extensive and frank answer. And part of the reason I asked is recently I was on a webinar with South Indian indigenous farmers who are making an amazing living just out of modernized traditional indigenous agriculture, something on 1/10 of an acre. So it kind of piqued my interest in what one could do here and what it would take. I'm part of the business case for the Million Acre Challenge.
Yeah, that's, I think it's a critical piece of the conversation that we need to keep in the forefront, is what is the profitability. And Kathleen, you've also mentioned that sometimes it's not just about the money that you're bringing in. There are other things that you want to consider. You mentioned sort of a spiritual component, and others I've heard have said similar things. So, but I think it's an important thing for us to keep in the conversation. I don't see any other questions, and I have one more because I two that aren't really related. One is that I failed to add the link to your parent farm to any of our slides. So if you want to pop that into chat, feel free. This is the farm on which Briar exists, just so that folks know about that farm as well, because she and Kathleen seem to have a pretty good relationship, and it would be nice to promote them a little bit. But also, Kathleen mentioned to me that her CSA just started this past year as a pivot for COVID. And she managed to not only maintain her farmers market sales, but also to operate a 30-member CSA for the first time. And I'd love for you to have a chance to just talk about that experience a little bit.
Yeah, it's funny because if you talked to me like this time last year, I would have said never a CSA, not in a million years. I had done it a little bit in the past, and I don't know why I didn't like it, because every week you have to, or at least I like angst so much about what I'm giving them every week. Like, I'm just like, oh my God, I'm giving them radishes again. They're going to hate me. Like, and I kind of just didn't like dealing with the emotions of that, like just for myself. Whereas with a farmer's market, I mean, you just show up with what you have, and nobody knows that carrot planting failed. Like, there's not really that same amount of like accountability, which is nice. It just kind of gives you like a little bit of freedom. But because of COVID, we weren't even sure that farmers markets were going to happen at all. So my hand was kind of forced in terms of just trying to find some way to get the stuff that was in the ground into somebody's hands. So I did end up enrolling 35 people in a CSA, and it is something that I'm going to continue to do. Although I think I'm going to do fewer people. My plan is to do 20 to 25 this year, just because it was a lot, not so much in terms of like what I was producing in the field, but just it's a lot to like pack and manage and all that every week. So I think for at least the time being, I'm going to reduce the number of that a little bit, but I am going to continue to do the CSA. And it makes a huge difference in terms of, I have money now that I can buy all the stuff that I need to with. And two, it gives me a good way to feel connected to the community in which I'm living. In order to effectively market my produce, I have to drive over an hour away to the farmer's market. And I felt some guilt about that, having to kind of like take it so far from home. But this way I can actually, participate and bring some of this into my community. I mean, it's like literally my neighbors who are, participating in this with me. So
another example of being forced into something that turned out to be a good thing. So one of COVID's few silver linings. Alrighty, we've taken up an extra little chunk of time. Thanks to those of you who were able and willing to stay. Again, keep in touch with the Million Acre Challenge. We're going to continue to build this program across the state. And 1,000 thank yous to Kathleen for sharing of her time and expertise today. It's been super to hear from somebody who's got boots on the ground, and we always appreciate that perspective. So our thanks to all of you, and we wish you a great rest of your Wednesday.
Thank you, guys. Keep up the good work.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Hi, Caroline.
Hi, Caroline. You look like...
Okay, I was about to jump off, but...
yeah, you look like Black Eyed Peas.
Yeah, I'm still logged into one of the Future Harvest Zooms. Sorry, I got distracted with email. I will see you guys later.
Bye.
Take care.
That was amazing.
Thank you so much. Good job. You did a great job. Nobody would ever know you were.
Yes, very, very impressive.
I agree. Yay, thank you.
And really, I mean, like, we guys need you so much. you guys, yeah, just are doing really good work. So yeah, I really appreciate it. So,
well, we're super grateful that you were willing to share that. I know that it can be so scary to like share your practices and like feel like, but I don't really know anything, but you really do, and your experience is incredibly valuable. And you were
Amanda, do you want to start recording?
Yeah, I do want anyway. I'm just still saying thank you. That's all.